Here's what went down. Kelsey Mitchell missed exactly 2 games on the schedule. 2, not 2 weeks of game action in the traditional sense, not a month on the injured reserve list. 2 individual basketball games, and in that window, she was not sitting idle at home on her couch. She was practicing with the team every single day. She even took to social media to share that her individual workouts had been physically demanding. This was a player who was actively staying sharp, staying ready, and staying engaged with the process. That is not someone who needs to be carefully nursed back into professional competition like she's recovering from major reconstructive surgery. So when Stephanie White stood at the post-game podium and told reporters that Kelsey Mitchell's drastically limited minutes were purely a matter of health management and getting her gradually back into game shape, that explanation deserved serious scrutiny. And when you hold it up against the actual facts, it does not survive even basic examination. Now, if you want to understand what a genuine extended absence looks like in professional basketball, we need to reframe the baseline. Real conditioning concerns arise after players miss 4, 6, or 8 weeks of game action. That's when cardiovascular levels drop noticeably. That's when a coaching staff has legitimate reasons to carefully monitor and restrict a player's workload during the return phase. 2 weeks, especially 2 weeks where the player remained active in practice, does not come close to clearing that threshold. Elite athletes at this level return from minor absences like that and go straight back into full rotations all the time. It's standard operating procedure across the league. But here is where the narrative falls apart completely. Coach White specifically told the media that one of her priorities was making sure Mitchell didn't sit in a stationary position for prolonged stretches because of her back. That was her stated concern. That was the reasoning she put on the record. Then go watch the game tape. Mitchell was parked on that bench from the 8-minute mark of the 3rd quarter all the way through to late in the 4th. That is not a brief rest window. That is an enormous, extended stretch of sitting completely still on a hard bench during an active professional basketball game, which, if you take Coach White's own stated medical logic seriously, is precisely what you would never want a player with a back issue to do. The contradiction doesn't require a medical degree to spot. It's sitting right there on the game film for anyone willing to look. And it gets worse. At one point during that long bench stretch, Mitchell got up on her own initiative and walked over to the stationary bike because she understood that after sitting for that length of time, she needed to get her body moving again. She was being a professional. She was trying to take care of herself. And Coach White physically pulled her back from the bike. A little later, Mitchell walked to the scorer's table ready to check in, and White waved her off and sent her back to the bench. If genuine injury management was the driving concern here, why would you actively prevent a player from warming up her own body? That sequence of events is impossible to reconcile with the public explanation that was offered. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, hit that subscribe button right now and join the WNBA Updates community. We cut through the noise and give you the real story behind what's happening on the court every single week. So what was actually happening? When you look at the rotation data, the answer becomes clear. Caitlin Clark entered the 4th quarter having logged only 11.5 minutes of court time. 11.5 minutes. At that level of freshness, she is absolutely prepared to play a full quarter and then some. Any reasonable basketball observer would expect her to log heavy 4th quarter minutes in a competitive game. Instead, 30 seconds into the 4th, a substitution came that effectively signaled the coaching staff's true intention. Clark's role in that stretch of the game was reduced to providing Kelsey Mitchell with a brief 3-minute rest interval before Mitchell came back on. That was it. Clark was not out there to close the game. She was not trusted with the ball in high-leverage moments down the stretch. Her assignment was to keep Mitchell's legs fresh for a few possessions, and then return to the bench so that the coach's preferred backcourt combination, Mitchell alongside Ty Harris, could take over. Now here's what needs to be said clearly and without apology. That is a coaching decision Stephanie White is fully within her authority to make. If she genuinely believes her offensive system functions more efficiently with Ty Harris distributing the ball and Mitchell operating in space off the ball, that is a defensible basketball philosophy. Harris is a disciplined, system-oriented guard who executes structure consistently. She fits the mold of what White's scheme demands. That is a real and legitimate strategic preference. But the problem, the massive, credibility-destroying problem, is that Coach White did not stand at that podium and say any of that. She didn't say, "I'm experimenting with lineup combinations." She didn't say, I believe this backcourt pairing gives us the best chance to win right now. She hid behind an injury narrative that the actual rotation decisions during the game directly contradicted. And when your public explanation cannot survive contact with the footage from that same game, you have a credibility problem. This dynamic matters far beyond one game. It matters because the relationship between a head coach and a franchise player is built on trust. When a player sits on the bench watching the game unfold without her, and then hears her coach tell reporters that the benching was for her own health, when she knows from her own body and her own experience that's not why she was sitting, that disconnect creates resentment. It creates distance. And it quietly poisons the locker room environment in ways that don't always show up on the stat sheet until much later in the season. Kelsey Mitchell is a smart, experienced professional. She knows exactly why she was sitting. She understands the tactical reasoning. But now she's in an impossible position, forced to publicly accept a narrative about her own physical condition that she knows doesn't reflect what actually happened. That is a genuinely unfair place to put a veteran player. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture for a moment. Coaching a high-profile superstar has never been a comfortable job. Fan bases have historically been critical of the coaches who manage their biggest stars. This is not unique to Indiana or to this era. But what distinguishes this fever situation from the normal friction that comes with coaching elite talent is the specific choice to be openly misleading about the reasons behind rotation decisions. Fans are smart. They watch every game. They track the minutes. They compare what they hear at the podium with what they see on the court. And when those two things don't match, trust erodes not just in the coach, but in the organization as a whole. The path forward here is not complicated. Coach White has a legitimate basketball vision. Her system works. The Fever are competing. There is a real and honest argument to be made for how she wants to build this roster and run these rotations. But that argument has to be made honestly. Tell the media you're working on lineup combinations. Tell them you have a philosophical preference for a particular style of backcourt play. Tell them you're figuring out how to best integrate different skill sets into your scheme. All of that is defensible. All of that is honest. And fans, even fans who disagree, will respect the candor far more than they'll respect a convenient excuse that falls apart the moment someone pulls up the game film. What we have right now is a simmering tension between a control-oriented coaching philosophy and a transcendent, improvisational talent who is never going to fit quietly into a rigid structural box. That tension isn't going away on its own. It either gets resolved through honest communication and genuine adaptation, or it compounds until something breaks. The clock is ticking. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Coach White needs to change her approach, or is she making the right calls and just communicating them badly? I want to hear from you. And if you want unfiltered, data-driven WNBA analysis every single week, no fluff, no fake narratives, then subscribe to WNBA Updates right now. Hit the bell so you never miss a breakdown. We'll see you in the next one.